Hello class and welcome to Module 9. This week we're actually going to get to create our own APIs. Last week you got to get familiar with them, you got to try accessing APIs, learned about using different query parameters, saw some aspects of what makes a good API. This week we're going to just go ahead and do it ourselves, making a few different simple API endpoints. So in Module 9, you'll see the first two topics are informational. So the first one is just, again, good aspects of a good API. You'll want to have a look at that, follow some of those links, gather some information there. The second topic is called monkey patching. And monkey patching is a way to override functionality of code of functions and things of that nature. In Python, you can do a lot more things, so the term monkey patching often gets associated with Python. The reason it is here this week is because one of the things that's very difficult to do with APIs is unit test them. And the reason it's difficult to unit test them is because the API itself can change. So if you have a unit test, let's say you're trying to test your code, but your code is dependent on a third party's API. Well, if your unit test runs today, where it accesses that other party's API and everything works great, you set up your unit test and you walk away. However, tomorrow that third party might change their API, and then your unit test will fail, and you'll end up wasting a whole bunch of time trying to figure out why your unit test suddenly stopped working, even though you haven't changed any code. So what monkey patching allows you to do is to just fake up those kinds of API calls. And it does a whole bunch beyond that, but the reason it's pertinent to this task is because it allows you to fake up those calls so you have control of the calls that are made to the other API. Now, there is some caution you have to take there, of course, because if you fake up all of the calls to the other API in your unit testing, you may not catch a change in that other API, and in fact, your production code may break because of it. But the point here is making sure that your code is working. That's why you use unit tests. So in that case, you would want to mock the expected response from that third party, as well as you could mock different bad responses, like how does my code react when it gets a 404? How does my code react when it gets a 500 response? You can fake all those things that would be very difficult to do with a real API. So there's no assignment for that part of it, but it is worth a read to get familiar with it. Even just the ability to have the right Google terminology to be able to look these things up in the future. Topic 3 is where we actually start building an API, and that's where we are here. So what we're going to work with today is a list of books. And these are books that come from my Goodreads list. So you can download your list of all of the books that you've read on Goodreads, as well as several different attributes about those things. So I do ask that you don't make fun of me too much, because I love to read science fiction books, and the vast majority of my books on Goodreads are science fiction. So whatever, that's just how I am. So, but we're going to use a couple of different versions of it. The first one I'm going to do is just called short book list. I just grabbed like 10 of my books for this first example and put them into the CSV file. So starting here, I have to import the CSV library, obviously, and then I'm going to open my book as a file, and I'm going to structure it in this way where it is a list of dictionary items, and this just lends itself well for what we're trying to do. So if I run this, you'll be able to see the structure here. So it is a list, and each item in the list is a dictionary with a series of attributes about that book. So the title of the book, the author, and I guess in this case I just have those two things. And then here's another title, and then the author, et cetera, et cetera. So really just a little bit of information about each one of the books, just title and author. Later on I'll add more attributes, but for this first one I'm just keeping it simple. So just a short list of books. What I would like to do is make this list of books available to someone via an API that I'm setting up. So I'm going to do the very simplest thing first. I'm going to stand up an API that just returns that entire book list in JSON format. So if somebody comes to that URL, it just gives them that list of books. So starting here, I have to import Flask. If you don't already have Flask installed, you'd have to do a pip install of Flask to make it available. I've already got it installed, so I don't need to do that. I believe I have instructions in Blackboard for it, but reach out to me if you have issues. And then from Flask, I need to import the request module and JSONify. And these are important. The request is so it can make web-based calls. JSONify is the ability to format my data in a way that goes well online on the web. So some of this is kind of boilerplate. So I'm creating an app called Flask, and I'm going to configure it to be debug equals true. So when you're building your API, having debug equals true, a lot of information comes back as people are making calls, or if there are errors, it brings a lot of information up on the screen. Obviously, if you were to take an app to production, you wouldn't want all that debugging type code to show up. But as we're building it, it's really valuable, so you'll want to leave that there. And then this is the only app route for this particular, or I've got two here, sorry. There's two app routes here. And app route is just essentially the URL that someone is going to access. And if that URL is accessed, it goes to the specific route for that URL and then runs the function inside of it. So app.route with just a / is essentially the home page of the API. It means someone has just come to the lowest level of the API, or the top level, I guess, domain of the API. So if somebody comes to that, all that it's going to do is run this little function here that just returns some string in HTML format. So Matt's books, an API that returns a list of Matt's books. If someone goes to the API endpoint and then goes to this directory underneath it, or URL underneath it, so it'd be home essentially / API v1 resources books all, then this code will run where it just JSONifies that collection I have up there, and it gets displayed because it's a return. So I'm going to run this code. Nothing happens if I run this code. It just sets it all up. I have to start my server up to actually get it to show up. So I've separated it into a different cell here. You don't have to do that. I just find it convenient. So if I now put this here, you can see, if you're familiar with Jupyter, that there's a star here that tells you that this cell is continuing to run. My server is loaded up and running right now on localhost. In PyCharm, if you're working there, you can run this exact same code. It just is one of those things where you have to hit the red stop button once you're done to kill the server. But I'm just going to launch this now. So it conveniently gives me this URL that I can click on. And this takes me to the home page of my API. So not a beautiful name because I didn't give it any kind of name, but it's 127.0.0.1, 5000. And this is that home page that I was telling you about. It just puts some text out there. Matt's books, an API that returns a list of Matt's recent book reads. Now, if I want to get to that other URL, I just add this to the end. And then I go, and then it runs that other function where it just JSONifies my data and puts it on the screen. So someone would be able to, if I had this out actually online or available outside of localhost, someone could go to that URL and see this information. Not too bad, not super useful, but not too bad. Now, in Jupyter, if I want to continue working, I have to kill my server because otherwise this cell will continue to run, nothing else will. Same thing with PyCharm. Again, you got to hit that stop to stop your server. Here, if I want to kill a server, I could interrupt the kernel, which is it's not great. You can do it if you have to, but the convenient way to do it is you just click on the cell in command mode and you hit I twice in a row, and you can see that that star turns into a 4. That means it's killed the server off. So if I go and refresh this page now, actually, I'm kind of surprised that loaded. No, it didn't. The server's now shut down, so it won't be able to access it anymore. Okay, so continuing on, I can do a little bit better, right? Because that's not super useful. Someone that wants to come to the API and just see all of my books, maybe somebody would want that, but I'd like to make it a little bit more useful. So I'm going to make it so they can request books from a specific author. So it gives them a little more functionality if they only want to see the books that I've read by Lois Lowry. By Lois Lowry, they can put that into their URL. So a lot of this is going to be a repeat from before because I'm just setting up the same API with more functionality. So all of this is the same to here. This part is different, which I'll talk about in a second. This part down here is the same. So I've still got the ability to have that home page with this text. I've got the ability to return all the books. This is the new route that I've created. So there's a third URL that they can go to and get a result. And you can see the difference here is it's /books instead of /all. So if someone goes to /books, they will run this function. And what this function does is it will look in the request.args, and this is the query parameters that you see at the end of URLs, like a question mark and then an ID and a parameter. That's what's going on here. So if I'm saying if author is in those request.args, then I want to take that author information and assign it to this variable. Otherwise, if someone didn't give me anything, I'm just going to give them an error because this URL endpoint requires that they give me a parameter. So I can't return anything if they don't give me what I need. So I'll just put an error there. And then as long as they've given me an author, we can continue on. I'm going to create a results field, which will store the matches to the author that they've selected. And then you can see I just loop through all of my books. So I'm saying if the author is the author that the person provided, then append it to my results. And then once it's gone through all the books to check, it will just return the JSON format of whatever matched the query parameter. So I'll go ahead and run my again, because this is my new updated API. And then I'm going to run my server again, because it won't take anything until I do that. And now you can see my server's running. If I go over here to the page, I can still see that the books.all endpoint works just like it did before. If I go and cut this out, just go to the home page of the API, it still has my little bit of text there. However, now I can do something like this, where I have that books endpoint, and then I can put a question mark for query parameter and say author equals Lev Grossman. And so that's the name of the author. The way this one's set up, it has to be an exact match, which I'll show you a better way in a minute. But this one has to be an exact match. So if you don't have the exact author, it's going to return nothing. The nice thing here is I don't have to get this plus right. So if I leave a space there, sorry, that's for something else. I have to put the plus in this case. Oh, it's being goofy. Sorry about that. Decided to put a .com in there. All right, well, that's annoying. Let's go back to this. There we go. So if I put in something like an author that doesn't have a match and run it, I just get an empty set because there's nothing that matched my query parameter. Okay, so that's a little bit more than what we had before, a little bit more useful, but still kind of limiting. I'm going to go ahead and, again, stop my server, hitting I twice. I'm also going to create one that lets them search by book title, because that's also pretty useful. If somebody's looking for a specific book, they would be able to search the book title. In this case, I'm going to allow for partial matches. So again, a lot of this is going to be the same as before. So all this is the same, and all of this is the same. The one, and actually all this is the same. The one that's now different is this last one. So now I'm creating an endpoint at book_search. And this one, when they run it, it's going to say if whatever they searched for, let me clarify that. If they added a request argument or a query parameter with the word search in it, then I want to grab that search, the equals part of that search, and assign it to this variable search. Otherwise, I'm going to say they didn't give me a search field, give me a search parameter. And so once I've got my search value that they want to search for saved, I can then do very similar to what I did before, create a variable to store the results, and then loop through my books. And in this case, I'm saying if what they're searching for is in my book title. And I do it in all lowers because then they don't have to try to figure out whether it's capitalized or not. Append it to the book and then return the results. So it doesn't have to be a match in this case, which is a little bit nicer, in my opinion. Okay, once I run that again on my server, and then this time, when I put in my search parameter, this one I just put in OMN, so it returned the wool omnibus silo number 1. I just put in like the letter A, and any book title with the letter A in it would get returned. So kind of nice if you can't quite remember the exact title. Gives you a little bit of flexibility there. Again, I'm going to stop my server and continue on. Okay, so that was all well and good, but if I have a lot of books, which I do, that I've read, having it all stored into a variable in my code is not great, right? And especially if let's say it's something beyond just books. Maybe I'm storing, I don't know, page load times, and there's 10 million of them. You don't want to have a variable with 10 million items in it, or a collection with 10 million items in it. So in that case, you need to have it stored off somewhere. Or in another case, if you've got, your company has a bunch of data that they store in a database, and you want to make some of it available via API, you need to be able to integrate with a database. So let's make our API work with a database, because that's more realistic to what you would be doing in real-world APIs. So first I've got to create my database, and I'm going to double check to make sure that it's not there. Okay, so I've already removed the old one when I was testing my code here. I'm going to first set up that same function. This is similar to what we saw a couple of weeks ago with databases. Here's my function where I would create my connection. Here's my function, create tables. This is all should be very familiar. And now I'm going to utilize those functions to create a table called books in a database called MathBooks. And it will have title, author, ISBN 13, which is that code, the scan code that's on the back of the book, the year it was published, and the date that I read it. And so that's going to be the table. And then I'm going to create the table. So I'll run that. And if I go over to DB browser, go into the directory, I've got my database now. So it's just a database with a books table that's currently empty. I need to put some data in it. So here I've got a much longer list of books. At the time I pulled it down, it was all of the books in my Goodreads. So I'm going to read that and then cast it as input file. And I'm going to use the csv.dictReader for that file. The reason I use dictReader is because it structures things in a really nice way for assigning to a database. And then I'm going to structure it. These are the columns that I'm interested in. And then I'll see what I'm going to put in my dictionary. There's a ton here, but oops. You can see it is a list, and in that list are tuples, and each tuple is one of the books. So I've got it structured in the way that I want it to load it into my database now. And I'm going to connect to my database, and I'm going to do execute many, which is what we saw again a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to put it into my books table with those columns, into those columns with the values from my collection that you just saw above, commit and close the connection. So if I run that, here in DB browser, hit F5. Now I've got a table populated with a whole mess of books, like 340 of them here. So not too bad. I got a nice table here, and I think that the people of the internet will really enjoy knowing what books I've read. So I'm going to make this available via my API. So let's make our API utilize our database. Again, a lot of this is similar, but there are changes. So I'm going to create my dict factory, which is a function that will be utilized by my different API endpoints to gather in my data from my database. So this is nice to have to make it easier to pull data. This hasn't changed. This one here now, to be able to return all the books, I need to make that call to my database. So you can see I'm telling it what database to connect to. I'm using that dict factory function from above, and I'm creating the connection, and then I'm executing select star from books. So that just gives me all of the books in the books table, and then it returns it. Pretty straightforward, just to select all from that table and then put it into JSONify format. I've got an error handler that I've added in now, so if somebody attempts to get a page that doesn't exist, then I actually return a 404, which is a little bit nicer than just having it not work. For the books endpoint, I'm actually getting a little bit smarter, and this is a little bit complicated, so you'll have to maybe look at it a few times to completely understand what's going on here. But for my books endpoint, instead of just allowing them to use one query parameter, I am going to let them use as many as they want, which means I need to build up my query parameter based on what they've given me, and then make a good selection for my database that gives them the expected results. So if they put in title as query parameter, author, ISBN 13, year published, date read, any of those in the query parameters, I can pull whatever they have given me. So if they said title equals blah, then I assign the string blah to title. But I'm doing it for any of them that they put in there. So they could put in 1 or up to 5 different query parameters that will all get assigned to these variables. And now this is where it gets a little weird to understand, but I am saying, give me everything from books where. So I'm building my SQL query right now. And each one of these lines is a part of the query. So if somebody wanted title, I would want to, the title blah, I would want a query parameter, I would like a SQL string that says select star from books where title equals blah. Well, if I want to do that for multiples, I would say select star from books where, and then if they put something in the title, title equals blah, and then it's ready to create the next part of the query. If they also sent me author, then it would say and author equals blah, and ISBN equals blah, and year published equals blah, and date read equals blah. If they don't give me anything, then I'm going to return a 404. But after that whole query is built, the thing that's weird is I'm going to end up with an and at the end. So I have to make sure I pull that off. That's the part that's a little bit weird. So here I can just take the query that's been built and then just lop off the last 4 characters. And all that does is takes off the last and to make the query properly structured. And so after all that, I've got my query built. I've printed here just so you can see it. You don't have to do that. And then I print to filter just to see, show you what it looks like when I'm running the server. I'll show that to you. And then I take that query, I make my connection, same stuff as before, using that dict factory function, and do my query, and then return my results in JSON format. It's kind of a big one. There's a lot going on there, but I'm going to run it, and then I'm going to start my server. And then I've already built one here, couple of queries here. So here's one where I'm saying, give me anything by author Jim Butcher. There's nothing new there from what we did before, but you can see it returns any book that I've read by Jim Butcher. And then here's where I printed it. So I wanted you to see the built up query. Select star from books where author equals question mark Jim Butcher. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. However, again, you can have multiple queries. So now I can do this one where I can say author equals Jim Butcher and year published equals 2010. I'm allowing multiple queries that all just get anded together to get a result. And again, you can see, actually it didn't update that time. I'm not sure why. But the point here is I had to build up that query in kind of a piecemeal way because I never know which one they're going to use. If they just give me title and year published, I need to be able to build a query on that. If they give me ISBN and date read, I need to be able to build a query on that. But that's a pretty good functioning API setup. All right, I'm going to kill this server again. So far, everything we've done has just been get, where we're allowing someone to pull data from our API. You don't have to just have get APIs. The APIs can be used for a bunch of different things. You can have get, push, put, insert, and delete, really. And I give a good definition of each one at Blackboard if you want to look at them a little bit more. I do have to give a bit of a warning here. A get type API is fairly low risk because someone can't affect the structure of the data. When you go beyond that, you kind of have a risk around someone making a change that could be damaging to your data. So you have to have a little more caution, a little more security around your API, which is beyond the scope of what we're doing here, but it's just something to be aware of. In this case, I am going to allow someone to add books to my database using a post API. So not only can someone access books, they can add more books to it, which if you have a secure API and you want people to be able to make updates to it, maybe it's a blog or something where you're storing the data in a database, it would allow them to write up a blog posting and then post it to the database table, which would then could be rendered to the page, something of that nature. So I'm going to build that. Again, nothing's changed here. Same kind of stuff as before. Nothing's changed here. Nothing's changed here. Nothing's changed here. Here is where the change is. So this specific endpoint allows both GET for someone to query, just like we did before, but it also allows posting. So the call made from the API caller will say, I'm either doing a GET call or I'm doing a post call, which allows us to go down two different paths depending on what kind of call they're making. So if it's a post, oh, sorry, that's just the name of the function. So if the request method is GET, then we're doing exactly what we did before. So nothing's changed there. Otherwise, if the request method is post, then we want to take what they're posting and write it to the database. And then it's a little bit different here. They have to send a request header with their content type. And the one I'm setting up here is only application/JSON. There are a bunch of different types you could accept, but you can limit it however you want based on your API. I just am keeping it simple here. So I'm only going to accept a JSON formatted post. And as long as they have that, everything will continue. Otherwise, I'm just going to give them a 415 error saying they've tried to give me an unsupported media type. But as long as they give me the right header for content type, then I'm going to, I print it so just so you can see it. And obviously that's just for demonstration purposes. And then I'm going to make a connection to my database. And I'm going to insert into my books table the values that they've sent me in their post. And then commit it to the database and close the connection. So I can do that now. So I'm going to run this. And I'm going to start my server up. Okay, so my server's running. Now, I cannot just go to a URL and type a post into my URL string. It doesn't work like that. To be able to do posts, you need to have something a little bit heftier or more functionality. Now, you can find on the web, you can find different sites where they let you create posts. What I would suggest you use, and I give you instructions on installation or at least a link to install, is to use a tool called Postman. Postman is a free tool that allows you to connect or create API calls or make API calls in a bunch of different structures. It's a good product and it's got a really good free version. And you do see it used quite a bit anywhere people are attempting to set up or work with APIs. It gives you kind of a GUI overlay for APIs. So here I've already got Postman set up and running. And in fact, I've already got my query created. But this is kind of the environment that you're working in. It shows a history of queries that I've made. The items across the top here are the different parts of the query. So I don't really have anything in params, but I could set up a series of parameters here, kind of like what I was doing before, where I was saying author equals Jim Butcher. You can, if you have to send an authorization header, if it's a secure API, which in a lot of cases it is, you can create your authorization portion of it here. Headers is an important part. Like I said before, I will only allow someone to write or post if they have the correct content type. So this is where I would have to set up a content type header of application JSON. Otherwise, my endpoint is just going to return a 415 error. So that needs to be there. And then body is where I'm actually putting in the JSON that I want to write. So you can see I've just created a very simple JSON here with the information. It's a title called "This is not a real book." It's my first published book. So I'm the author and ISBN, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the information I actually wanted to post to the database. And I'm just going to load up DB Browser here just to prove that I'm not faking it here. I'm going to go down to the author M, which is right here. Oh, right here. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to send this post. Now I know my server's already running in the background, so this will work. And you can see it finished sending it. Down here on the bottom it says 200, which means there was a good status. Everything went fine is what it's telling me. If I come back over to my DB browser and I refresh, you can see that I am now right here. So I was able to, via an API, update my database, which is pretty powerful. So that's Postman. We don't really get into it beyond that. It's just to make this very simple query to get comfortable with being able to do beyond just gathering data. Of course, like I said, you can also do updates of data. You can do deletes of data via API. You very rarely see deletes in any kind of a public API, but within companies, if they're working across like microsystems or microstructured systems, they might have those kinds of API calls back and forth depending on what they're trying to do. Okay, that is the last thing I wanted to show you. So hopefully this is enough for you to try to build out your own simple APIs. Like I said, I am showing this in Jupyter Notebooks, but the same code can get put into PyCharm or another IDE and should work without issue. You just have to figure out how to stop the code from running, which in PyCharm, it's the stop button that you see on the bottom left corner. But some of you I know are using other IDEs, so if you have issues, you have to let me know, and I'll help you Google how to stop it from running if it's not stopping. It acts the same as if you were in an infinite loop. Like you have to interrupt it to get the code to stop running. Perhaps Control C actually works, like it's trying to tell me here, depending on the IDE.